Hi, and welcome to our panel Q&A with Franco Stevens, Jen Rainin, Rivkah Beth Medow, Katrin, and Andrea Pino-Silva for our release of Ahead of the Curve on digital TIFF Bell Lightbox. As you join us today, we encourage you to reflect on the land that you are on and its history. I am located on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee. The territory is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We are grateful to work on this land. My name is Ming-Jen Lim, and I'm the Senior Manager of Theatrical Programming here at TIFF. I would like to extend a sincere thank you to our lead sponsor, Bell, and our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oréal Paris, and Visa, as well as to our major supporters, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto for their continued support. I would also like to thank Together Films for providing us with this film. With a fistful of credit cards and a lucky run at the horse track and chutzpahs for days, Franco Stevens launched the best-selling lesbian lifestyle magazine, Curve. The documentary Ahead of the Curve traces the power of lesbian visibility and community over the past 3 decades through the story of the publication's foundation, development, and expansion. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Franco Stevens, creator of Curve, the film's directors, Jen Rainin and Rivkah Beth Medow, as well as featured subjects, Katrin and Andrea Pino-Silva. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you, Franco, Jen, Rivkah, Andrea, and Kim. Thank you all for joining me to discuss Ahead of the Curve. First off, congratulations. When I first saw this film, what I found really came through was this openness, love, and camaraderie. You all were really generous with the audience, the community, and with each other. Can you each talk a little bit about how you came to develop this project or be involved in this project? What made you want to tell the story now?
Oh, wow, the story was born out of love, so I'm glad that that's coming through. It really, it came about as I got to know my wife in the early years of our marriage. And she would tell me stories about the early days of the magazine and would say things like, oh, yeah, I was sued by Katrin, or, oh, I used to have to go to Loan Shark sometimes to make payroll, or my all-time favorite, oh, yeah, nobody would give me any money as a 20-year-old homeless person living in my car who had a great idea. So I took out 12 credit cards in one day, I cashed them all out, and I went to the racetrack and bet on the horses to get the money to start the magazine. So I thought, oh, wow, this is a story that needs to be a movie. Like, this is a movie. So I started writing the screenplay for it. And in my research, I realized that, I was having a hard time finding our histories, the factual, the nonfiction stories about the women who came before, the history of queer women's culture. And it became clear to me that this needed to be told as a documentary film. So that's the beginning of this adventure. And then Rivkah came along.
Yeah, so I think I got involved because Jen and I have been friends for many, many years. And I think we were driving to another friend's party. Jen was looking for a producer for this project. This is Jen's first film that she's directed. And she was telling me about how she was looking for a producer. And I said something like, oh, well, did you ask this producer? And so we decided I would come on. And that was like 4 years ago. And the film changed a lot. Maybe Franco wants to talk about some news that she got like halfway through filming what was originally a historical film and then really shifted gears.
Yeah, well, we were, like you said, we were almost done filming, and we were on our way to Klexicon in Las Vegas to do a panel. And I got this call from the current publisher saying that, the magazine was in trouble. It may not even make it to the release of this film. And it sort of sent us into a tailspin of, well, is there even a need for the magazine anymore? And what about the word lesbian? Is that still relevant today? And the movie then takes a turn and we go on a quest to find out, the answers to those questions.
Really? I mean, I remember you saying like, I need to find the women who are doing the kind of work that I was doing in the 90s today, which is what led us to these other two fabulous people. So Kim, how did we find you? Do you remember?
I remember when you reached out to me. And for me, I was like a little bit of a fangirl kind of moment, because Curve Magazine was something that when I first started doing community organizing and creating programming, Curve Magazine was really one of the first like content that we were sharing. And I remember going to Indigo bookstore, the one that used to be like at the corner of like Queen and John, and sitting there on Saturdays and like getting all the Curve magazines and everything that I could find in that kind of content, and pulling it out.
And then we found Andrea, and Andrea ended up being an incredible guide, I would say, for Franco in this journey.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's an honor to me. Yes, of course. I remember I was working at the National Center for Lesbian Rights. I was a digital strategy and communications manager, but I have a very interesting background with the industry. So I was part of another documentary called The Hunting Ground when I was in college. And I was both in front of the camera and behind the scenes. And I have a very real interest in helping shape narratives. So when I first spoke to Jen, Franco, and Rivkah, I didn't think that I would be part of the film. I thought we would just have some fun conversations. And then I ended up actually going with them to ClexaCon and then continue to be in conversation. So it's been really exciting to have been part of the film, but also to be able to shape the larger narrative and to get to work with these amazing women.
That's amazing. And I
also just wanted to add, just wanted to add that I do think that it is a love letter, or, like a digital love letter to the future. In a lot of ways, I really think that, even asking the questions of like, is the conversation around or the term lesbian even still relevant, those sorts of things, I think it's really crucial that as we see this growth of visibility in the media, that we're all aware of the ways that, lesbians have archived so much of our collective history. And it's not just a very specific slice. It really is a very broad perspective that brings us to a place now where we're getting to see, like Elliot Page come out and Demi Lovato identify as they and them. I think that in order to really understand where we can go, we do have to have this context of where we've been. So I do think that the whole film really sends a lot of love, like takes a lot of love from where it came from and sends a lot of love forward in a way that is very unique.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And speaking about love, it's such an ambitious film. I'm curious, Jen and Franco, working together as partners, as you talked about, was there a shift in dynamic once you became the director and the subject?
I think there was really a deepening of the relationship, because there was such an incredible opportunity for a new understanding of this extraordinary creature that I married. On one level, like I've never known Franco to be able-bodied, to be out of a wheelchair, and so for me to get to spend several years immersing myself in her earlier life, I feel like I got to know you as a 20-something badass baby dyke, and it was good for our marriage. Let me just say.
I think that having Jen behind the film and Rivkah, allowed me to be open and vulnerable. Like I trust them so much to tell the story that I said, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to let you ask the hard questions that I never like to talk about. So in that sense, I gave them my trust, and gosh, I love them both so much in different ways, obviously.
That's great. And so I'm curious for the rest of you, when you actually saw the film, was there anything that you took away or were surprised about during the whole story for any of you?
Well, I think that the sort of inception point, describing the whole process of like what it meant to start a magazine at that time, I don't think I had an awareness of what that was like on any level, or what that would mean, or all of the ways that you would have to continue to keep resourcing at a time where, no one publicly wanted to do that. So I think that even just growing up in a very different context, where I was out at 14, like I've always grown up in a world where even though there's resistance, there's still an openness and a culture and a community and all of those sorts of things that we really take for granted. And I think that every time we get reminded of how far we've come, it stops a lot of that complaining of how much more we need to do. So I think really giving that context of where we came from, I think was really sobering.
I would say the biggest thing for me, I think, is to continue to be in conversation has been incredible. And also to recognize that there's just so much of my own journey that I haven't even fully processed. Kind of like what Kim was saying. I mean, I've been out since I was 20, but a lot of my own, I guess, like trauma or stress with the coming out process is that it was tied with an experience of sexual violence. It was because I experienced sexual violence that I finally got to the point where I allowed myself to process my sexuality, which I knew about pretty much the entirety of my life. I really had no interest in boys, but I was so hyper-focused, a typical immigrant kid, so focused on getting to school, going to college, making it as an American. And it really wasn't until I experienced violence that I had to finally grapple with all the dissociating that I was doing around my queerness. And I think that it's been so powerful to be able to hear so many stories. And also, I'm so thankful that so many of the women who came before us have done this archival work, have done this very life-saving work of being able to trace our stories and continue to keep them visible, right? And I think that for me, it's really humbling to see myself as a part of the movement, because I think for a long time, I just saw myself as a person who was a queer person, a lesbian. I happened to be a lesbian. I didn't think that I would be part of the movement because I wasn't, I didn't think I was leading, right? I didn't think I was out there. I wasn't suing anybody. I wasn't fighting for marriage. I mean, I wasn't really thinking about marriage, right? I was a teenager, basically. And really, it's been that after being in conversation with these women that I've realized that my work was work in queer liberation, that fighting for spaces where we didn't experience violence was part of the queer movement. And that to me has been so beautiful, to be able to realize that my work is queer liberation work. And it's part of what makes me so excited to be part of this project is reframing the way that we think of lesbians' contribution to our society. It's not just marriage, it's not just waving the rainbow flag. It's that so many lesbians have been leading across movements, and that part of our story is oftentimes erased.
Amazing. You all talked about your work in the movement and also the film. I'm wondering a little bit about, you talked about in the film, you and your team reach out to women across the country, traveling to them, to smaller towns to connect directly with them. In the years that Curve started, we've had the advent of the internet recently with the isolating effects of COVID. How has that changed? How has that approach changed? And for this film, how has the promotion impacted that? In the movement work, how has that impacted what you do as well? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. That's a big topic. Yeah, I mean, the way that Franco, the way that you reached out and brought community together in the early days, I mean, that's been a guiding light for us in the way that we've brought this film into the world. You'll see this in the film if you haven't seen it already. But Deneuve, Franco and her team went out in their van across the country to tiny towns, any place. You can talk about this.
Sure. Yeah. Since there was no internet available to people on a wide scale in the early 90s, the only way to reach lesbians were to go to their hometown and go to the bars and the clubs and the coffee shops and the bookstores, and the venues where they would be, in their natural element, I guess you'd say. There was no other way to reach them. So we would go to a town and we'd have a host sister, and she would, let us sleep at her house. We were really low budget, and we just drive our van from town to town and set up these meet and greets and introduce women to the magazine. And in a lot of cases, they would drive for, an hour, 2 hours to come and meet us at the bookstore. And, it was a real building of community. It was very different than the way it is now. Reaching women, you could be a lesbian in the middle of nowhere and not realize there was another person like you within hundreds of miles, and there could be somebody, a mile or two away.
And you're right. Now things have changed a lot. I mean, with it's an interesting thing. It's sort of like a pendulum swing. So the internet comes along, and it seems as though people feel like, wow, we can just connect so easily now. We don't need our spaces like lesbian bars or feminist bookstores or the club. We don't need it. So we're good. We can meet this way. And I feel like something interesting has happened during the pandemic where we were sort of forced into these little boxes, and I think it's really hit home for a lot of people that this is not this is good, but it's not reaching that level of connection that we all so need. We as animals need this connection with our people, with our communities. So what I'm seeing is, and I hope it continues and gets momentum, but there's a lot of energy starting to happen around real spaces again.
And I'd just like to add, maybe Kim can, jump in here, because I think you realize that need for physical space too.
Yeah, this past, in the past year of the pandemic, more people have been online than have literally been online in the history of online. More people have been online for longer and greater amounts of time than we have ever experienced in our human history. So it really is an unprecedented amount of exposure in digital spaces. And I think that there's a positive that comes from it, because that kind of isolation where you feel like you might be the only one in the world having an experience is less likely to happen now. That even if your experience is very small or very particular, that there's probably someone else that you can find, or some group on Reddit or some Clubhouse chat room that you can connect to and find other people where you can say, me too, like we also have this experience. But at the same time, I think, even the choice of words like social distancing versus emphasizing physical distancing really speaks to the way that people are experiencing a very tangible kind of social starvation, right? Especially in queer communities, people are really physically, obviously, away from each other. And I think that we all moved into our homes, especially if you're in Toronto and Ontario, like this has been the longest lockdown in the world. We are still in it right now. And I think that, historically, we've seen that after the 1918 pandemic, we had the Harlem Renaissance. So we had one of the most prolific periods of time in Black, queer, and broader community cultural spaces. We've never seen that kind of surge. And I think that we're gearing up for exactly that now. I think that you can only restrict people for so long and, keep people in their place for so long before there's a very tangible push and a desire to connect and to create spaces with each other. So I do think we are going to witness a really big pendulum swing that's going to take us into the next decade. I think that things are going to look markedly different from the way that they have looked in the past. And I think that there's going to be a huge push for more cultural creation, more of a catalytic approach to that, and definitely a real desire for outdoor spaces and physical spaces that connect online spaces. Because I think I've also been witnessing there's more of a desire for people to witness conversation. Like when YouTube channels have definitely blown in this time because people aren't so interested in watching scripted conversation so much anymore. They really want to see authentically how are we having this conversation? How are we tackling these issues? And what does it sound like coming out of people's mouths? So I think that we're also going to see a very interesting hybrid with digital and in-person spaces that are going to bring people to, a greater level of connection.
I would say also too that I think one of the things that I'm seeing now is a lot of people are leaving what we consider, I guess, queer havens, right? The San Franciscos, the New Yorks, the DCs. I was one of those people. So I left DC a few months into the pandemic. A lot of it because I was paying too much money for rent. I was working virtually. And for a while I had wanted something different. So I moved back to the South. I moved to Durham, North Carolina. But I'm from Miami, Florida, and I hadn't been back home since 2019. And this is the first time that I'm back home. And this is the first time that I've brought home a partner, because I've never brought home a partner. My family more or less knows that I'm queer. I mean, my immediate family does. Anyone who has internet knows. But it's something I have never really lived as a visibly queer person here. And honestly, like a lot of immigrant people, like a lot of communities of color, really, it's this fear of giving up your ancestors as a queer person. And I would say that most of my queer friends have left Miami, but some are coming back, and some are also coming back to the South, right? I dream of there being queer spaces in my home. Like, there are no visibly queer people in my neighborhood. I am that person, and I look the way that I do. I'm femme. I mean, my partner's femme. Like, there is no visible queerness in my spaces, even now, right? And like, I dream of those days, and I would say that there are very few times in which I have been with queer people in Miami. And I think, again, like, a lot of people see Miami as like a queer haven. It's not a queer haven. It's still very scary to be a queer person here. Like, and I think even for me, like, my family knows I'm queer. I still think they think it's a phase. I think the idea of children, they don't really understand. And like, I think that I hear of stories of women who have families, who have communities in the South. And I think that this is something that I think is going to happen, because more people are going to be leaving these havens after the pandemic. They're going to be working virtually. And what I dream is of these spaces in Miami, in Little Havana, in Durham, North Carolina. Like, I want us to not have to leave our homes to feel safe and be who we are. Like, that is my dream. Like, my dream is that I can get un café con leche and then also go to a queer bookstore. Like, why should I have to move to San Francisco to be a queer Cuban woman, right? And I think that this is my hope. My hope is that with Gen Z being more unapologetically who they are, with there being more exposure and more queer stories being mainstream, and also with there being hopefully more opportunities in the South and in non-historically queer cities, that we're going to see more queer spaces. So that is my dream. And I do see that as being much more of a possibility, I think, because more folks they're moving elsewhere. And with that, like, we're seeing more queer people moving to places where historically, there wouldn't have even been an idea of being able to be safe and visibly out there.
I love what you're saying, Andrea. I mean, I totally agree. We're watching it. I live in the Bay Area, and we're watching that outflow. And I mean, it's kind of like the filmmaker's joke, like, you make a film to start a conversation, but it's so much what we're looking at doing with Ahead of the Curve, right? Is taking it around the country and having these conversations in so many areas that are also, outside of the kind of queer havens or meccas, the larger cities. I mean, even when we were creating the film, we took the film around to test screen, like in my hometown in Indiana, in Michigan, in Houston, right? And to have these conversations where I think one of the most resonant things that I heard in Michigan was like, it's, in the film, you talk about how, things were in the 90s. In a lot of ways, they're still like that for us here now. And we want to have these conversations, and we're so happy that, you're making this film so we can gather. But it's still, Kim talks about how visibility still doesn't equal safety in so many of the places around the country, even in the US, where, we did get marriage in 2015. It's still, not safe to be out, which is a little bit shocking for some of us, but, really a daily experience for others. Yeah.
Thank you so much. One final question. You said in the film you envisioned this as a drama before, and you would still like to turn that into a narrative feature one day. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're conceiving of that story and any dream casting for any one of you?
Well, we sort of moved that forward in a way that we hadn't expected originally. So Rivkah and I, we wrote a pilot for an episodic based on the early years of Deneuve. And so yes, we definitely need some casting ideas, but we are very excited about it. We spent a lot of time. It was one of the most fun things I've ever written. It's such a joy. It's such a wonderful world to immerse yourself in. So I'm so hopeful that it ultimately gets picked up and we get to share this world with other people. It's just the most fun.
The lesbian antics in San Francisco in the 90s. They're just like, what a backdrop.
Yeah, very sexy time, I would say. So I don't know, who do you all think? I mean, we have fictionalized a lot of the characters, and we have a fictionalized version of Franco, but there is a Franco character. Who should play her?
Is Elliot Page too obvious? Of like a cute, like totally. Yeah. I think it's super exciting. Like that makes me so excited that you're talking about that because again, I think growing up like in the 90s and the 2000s, so much of like lesbian film was like a tragic end. Yeah. And there were only like a few, I remember like there were just a few that were like, okay, so this one doesn't end in like sadness and heartbreak and like a whole explosion of awful things. So I think that is really, for me, what I perceive as like the next wave of what can come out of this kind of like catalyst is more, fictional, like more fiction or like historical fiction. But that isn't about like, necessarily even like love or relationships in that kind of way, but about the many different kind of stories. I really do I think it's important for us to be able to, or people to look to the film or look to films like that. And they see possibility models. They're like, oh, I could do that. Or maybe that's a path I could go. Or, you start to explore and imagine yourself in those kinds of positions in the same way that, even when kids watch like the Wonder Woman movie, right? Like they watch that and they're like, girls start to think like, oh, like I could be a superhero too. Like now I have a character to play through. I think that fictional stories give you a character to play out and play through and imagine. And like, what would it look like for kids to be like playing out those stories that they're watching on those films? Like, I think that that's such a dope possibility.
That's amazing and really exciting. Thank you all for taking the time to speak with me today. I really appreciate you all sharing your stories, and we're so excited to be able to open Ahead of the Curve, Friday, May 28th as a 1-week Canadian exclusive on digital TIFF by Lightbox. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We're really, really thrilled.